In the furthest ring, Vriska and Mina have several heart-to-heart conversations about Irania's plan to doom Lord English, as well as Mina and Vriska's plans to use the House Juju against him. With Irania no longer mind-controlling a majority of their ghost army, Vriska is now unsure of her own prior motivations for stopping Lord English. The two decide to abandon their former plans. They visit a carnival in a dream bubble of unknown origins, where Vriska gets a tattoo. Returning to the bubble with Mina's castle, they lie back and watch dream bubbles exploding in the distance like fireworks. The two discuss the fear of death and sad existence of Lord English, agreeing that it's much better to just try and be happy. The two begin a relationship together. John returns to the Inciposphere to find it completely wrecked, with John and Roxy's planet being the only two planets left standing after the battle on Lofoth. Coming across Dirk, John tries to find out what happened, but Dirk just wants to be left alone and feels personally responsible for everything. Dirk is consumed by shitty glitches, which quickly start to encompass the entire session. John sees Roxy fly towards her planet with Rose in tow and follows. On Lopan, Rose briefly wakes up and asks what happened. When Roxy tells her, Rose laments over Kanaya's death and that she never even got to tell Kanaya, or even her own mother 3 years prior, how much she loved them. Rose dies full of regrets, and her death is deemed heroic. John consoles the now grieving Roxy and blames himself for not being here to stop Irania's screw-up. When Roxy asks about Dirk, John says he's unable to save Dirk because the glitches are getting too shitty for even him to clean up with his powers, and Dirk asks to be left alone anyways. The two come to the conclusion that they're probably in a doomed timeline, and start to resign themselves to that fate when Terezi flies in with her rocket wings. Terezi crashes, walks over to John, headbutts him, and orders him to fix this. John notices Terezi is wearing Jade's shoes, and Terezi is forced to inform John that Jade is dead. Everybody's dead. Terezi wants John to master his newly acquired retcon powers and undo the damage Irania did. She sends Roxy off to meet her denizen and tells John to meet with his as well, but not before Terezi calls John over to plan what he should do after meeting Typheus. John convinces Terezi to try to use her Sphere of Mind powers to figure out where everything went wrong. Terezi tells John to try and remember a phrase so that he can remember it later on, and, seeing Jade's ruby slippers, John decides on "There's no place like home." Terezi puts an enormous amount of effort into using her mind powers, but it fizzles out and doesn't work. Terezi asks John to leave, and John promises to make sure none of this ever happens, flying off to Loas. John's denizen faces him, with the choice of becoming the new Alpha John, but at a terrible cost, and Roxy's denizen does the same. Both accept their respective terms, and Roxy flies to Loas to meet up with John. When John accepts, John's denizen fills his lair with oil, forcing John to either die or use his retcon powers to get out of the situation. John teleports all of the oil away, spreading it throughout Paradox space and retroactively altering panels throughout the comic with small oil stains, clearing the pipes on Loas. With the pipes clear, John can use the pipe organ nearby to clear away the clouds and free the fireflies on his planet, completing the denizen quest he was meant to complete since he first entered the Inciposphere. Little Seb is nearby to reinsert the cartridge, allowing us to continue viewing the story. Loas is teleported to a blank space outside the comic, with John, Roxy, and a few of the sprites in tow. John and Roxy catch up with each other, discuss their current predicament, and come across the place where Dave's bro was killed and later buried. Roxy ganks bro's unbreakable katana, and the two discuss what to change about the timeline, mainly focusing on ganking the Ring of Life so that Calliope can use it instead of Urania. John zaps a way to fix the timeline, leaving Roxy on Loas in blank space. While waiting for John's return, Roxy buries Rose, planting the katana and her rogue mask next to it as a makeshift gravestone. Roxy holds a funeral, Jasper Sprite appears, and the two hug. John zaps all over Homestuck, arriving at the end of Act 1 and the Midnight Crew intermission, and then arriving during Dave's time rant in Act 6, Intermission 1. John realizes he has to stop himself from donking up the timeline, so he tackles his past self, zaps them both to blank space, and bonks his past self on the head, sending him off to meet Roxy. John remembers Terezi's former plan, focusing on the phrase, "There's no place like home." John zaps to the moment Terezi tried to use her mind powers previously. Terezi is astounded that her plan actually worked. In an attempt to not cause a paradox, John sends his past self to meet his denizen. Terezi hands John a list of words and instructions, telling John to use his now mastered retcon powers and the list's passwords to zap to specific points in Homestuck and alter those moments in history according to the instructions under each. After relaying this information, Terezi draws an outline of her own body on the ground with chalk, tosses the chalk to John for him to use later, and gives a few final words of encouragement, then dies, falling in the exact position of the outline she drew. Following Terezi's instructions, John zaps to the moment he reunited with his friends in the Alpha session at the end of Act 6, Act 5. John bids everyone a fond farewell, promising to fix the timeline, and then heads to the Prospidian battleship, ganking the Ring of Life before Gamzee has a chance to. Then, John zaps to a moment early in Act 5, Act 1, stealing one of Terezi's plushies. John then zaps to a moment a bit later in the Troll session, leaving a message for Terezi stating, "You don't need him." John begins to wonder if Terezi just sent him on a quest to fix Terezi's love life or something similarly stupid, and then zaps away to when Terezi was investigating Tavros' murder. John leaves the plushie he previously stole for Terezi to use in the investigation. Zapping away yet again, he arrives a bit later when Terezi was speaking to Dave just before finding Nepetta's corpse. John leaves a message for Terezi, informing her that the killer was in fact Gamzee, and then adds his own addendum, asking Terezi what was meant by "you don't need him," wondering if him referred to Karkat or Dave. He advises Terezi to stay away from both relationships since neither really ended that well. Terezi is utterly confused. John next zaps to when Terezi was exploring the room where she found Disc 2 of Homestuck. He honks a horn, alerting Terezi to Gamzee's presence in the room, causing her to tie him up. John is smashed into the wall when the door he's hiding behind is kicked off its hinges by Terezi as she ascends to face Vriska. John zaps away one final time, arriving just before Terezi killed Vriska. Following the list of instructions, he yells at the two to stop Terezi from killing Vriska, then clocks Vriska in the face, sending her flying and knocking her out. Terezi is utterly confused and rather miffed at John's presence and actions. John informs Terezi that her future self sent him here to fix the timeline, and laments that he can't follow the final instruction on the list of giving Terezi his dad's wallet since he lost it ages ago. Karkat, Kanaya, and Solix all arrive and are all equally confused by John's presence, but John refuses to keep explaining himself and zaps away, much to the frustration of Karkat. John arrives on Loas and gives Roxy the Ring of Life. As the two hold hands, John teleports himself, Roxy, and the entire planet of Loas to the new altered timeline. In Calliope's dream bubble, Calliope and Jade discuss their respective home lives. Jade recalls being told stories by another Calliope, one who had dominated over her brother and ascended to God tier. Calliope opts to illustrate the story as Jade recounts it. Soon after the 3-year trip on the Prospidian battleship began, John's planet suddenly exploded, killing both Dave Sprite and John. Jade spent the next 3 years alone and depressed. Near her journey's end, she encountered a god-tier Calliope, the Muse of Space, in a dream bubble. This Calliope explained to her that Loas exploded because Typheus, John's denizen, awoke and killed John. He did this to correct a small error. This John wasn't the Alpha John anymore. Instead, another John from another timeline would later appear and become the Alpha John because of that John's deal with his denizen. The John who made the deal is the John who fixed the timeline. The god-tier Calliope related this John's story to Jade, and then proceeded to tell Jade her own story. This version of Calliope never contacted the Alpha Kids. She was less soft and dominated over her brother. She was then given the choice by her denizen. Either she would become a conqueror, which is what Caliborn chose, or she would die, but in death be given the chance to be an integral part of stopping such a conqueror. Having no chance to choose the former anyways, she chose the latter, died, and has been waiting in the furthest ring ever since until such a time that she can play her part in bringing down Lord English. Jane arrives in the bubble, and Jane and Calliope have a nice first meeting/reunion. Jane realizes that the two new faces aren't actually trolls and decides to make her own trollsona as well. Jane recalls her trickster shenanigans, which Jade stops her from describing in too much detail, but not much else. Jade reminds her that the Condesce had the two turned into bad guys. In their new timeline, everything in the Suburb session was nearly the same up until the end of Act 6, Act 5. However, when Jade went to intercept the meteor, she never came back. The trolls and kids from the meteor then assaulted Durst with the intent to save Roxy and Jake from prison. When Jane threw her Skyafork at Rose during the resulting skirmish, Roxy intercepted, resulting in a heroic death. When Jane attempted to resurrect Roxy, she let her guard down and was attacked. Though Jane presumes she was killed in this moment, Jade finally remembers what happened when she arrived on the meteor. Jade and Jane aren't dead. The now-living Vriska merely put them to sleep. Caliborn takes over the narrative one last time. He unlocked his true planet, the land of colors and mayhem, and through the screens of his planet saw his own future. Soon, he will leave to confront his denizen Yaldabaoth. When he kills him, he will gain the House Juju, immortality, and some sweet flashing pool ball eyes. After this, he will somehow obtain the Ring of Void, and the Alpha and Beta kids will arrive to fight him via John's retcon powers. Caliborn will use the Juju to trap John, Rose, Dave, and Jade, and then use the Ring of Void to banish it to the furthest ring, where it will later be found. In the ensuing battle with the Alpha kids, Gamzee will be sliced in half, and everyone but Dirk will get their asses handed to them. Caliborn will defeat Dirk, but will continue to wail on him despite having already won. Enraged, Jake's hope powers will explode outward and knock out Caliborn, dealing him his first true defeat. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, he will gain a bit of respect for Jake, and decide to steal his last name, rebranding himself as Lord English. Jake will be knocked out from the effort, and Dirk will get back up, intent on banishing Caliborn's soul with his Prince of Heart powers. Caliborn will attempt to intercept, but will be distracted when Arquia Sprite suddenly arrives with an army of robot horses. He will restrain Caliborn as Dirk rips Caliborn's soul out, accidentally catching Arquia Sprite and half of Gamzee in the process. All three of them will be sealed inside Little Cal, since Dirk won't have enough strength to destroy Caliborn's soul himself, and Roxy will banish the puppet into the void. The time loop that is Little Cal has been completed. After being banished to the void, Gamzee's Chuckle Voodoo powers will summon him to Dream Dave's tower. Little Cal will be thrown out of the tower, wind up in the lab where John created the Paradox clones, and be transported to Earth with baby Dirk. In the Alpha universe, the doll will no longer be possessed, since the souls inside went to the Beta universe. Dirk will drop it into the ocean, Caliborn will obtain it, and Arquia Sprite, Gamzee, and Caliborn will be sealed inside it, creating a loop. Lord English's soul will continue into the Beta universe, where it will be stolen as a trophy by Jack Noir. Little Cal will latch onto one of the robot Irradias, and will be transported back in time to the Alternian universe, and be patched up. It will be Paradox cloned into Doc Scratch, who would later become Lord English. Little Cal, still possessed by Lord English's original souls, will wind up in the Alpha Kids Inciposphere, and will possess their version of Jack Noir. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this summary, be sure to leave a like. If you want to be informed of the remaining summaries when they're uploaded, hit that subscribe button. I also have a few other videos in the works, so be on the lookout for those too. If you want to support me, you can donate to my Patreon or my GoFundMe, links in the description. And with that out of the way, I'll see you in the next video.